The South Carolina house fire conceals evidence of a contract killing. When a second death is discovered, police connect the two incidents and suspect a group of businessmen who will kill to protect their interests and settle scores. Agents must use their own tricks and their own criminal contacts to uncover the truth and stop the cutthroat conspirators.
Murder for hire is a complex crime. Solving it means finding the killer and whoever paid for the hit. In South Carolina, a death first route accidental was no accident. But that was just the beginning. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents discovered greed, betrayal, and shady dealings, and found that sometimes family ties can strangle.
Florence County, South Carolina, lies at the heart of the state. An area where farmland meets swampland. And the working poor live side by side with the wealthiest families. Most residents of the small town of Atlanta lead quiet, rural lives, 25 miles from the city of Florence. But in the late 80s, a hidden danger began to disrupt the quiet. On the morning of June 10th, 1987, the volunteers of the Atlanta Rural Fire Department responded to a farmhouse fire outside of town. By the time they reached the scene, the house was engulfed in flames. It was the home of William Graham, a wealthy tobacco farmer well known in the small community. The firefighters struggled to control the flames, knowing the elderly Graham lived alone and might be inside.
That's command. Go ahead, let us see.
After 90 minutes, they finally extinguished the blaze. Investigators searched the gutted house, and in the bedroom, found Graham's body lying in his charred bed. After the body was removed, arson investigators searched for the cause of the fire. Burn patterns showed it began there in the bedroom. Chemical tests on the furniture, floor, and walls indicated that no accelerant was used to fuel the blaze. Near the fire's point of origin were several electrical outlets. The investigators believed it had been an electrical fire caused by faulty wiring in the farmhouse. They ruled the blaze accidental. At autopsy, a pathologist noted massive burn injuries and evidence of smoke in the victim's lungs. Deciding there was no need for x-rays, he concluded Graham's death was a result of asphyxiation due to carbon monoxide poisoning. County Prosecutor Dudley Salibi read about the case in the local papers.
Even though the autopsy had not indicated foul play, and even though there was no manifest evidence of arson, there were rumors throughout the Atlanta community that Mr. Graham had died as a result of foul play.
Sheriff's investigators followed up on the rumors, interviewing Graham's neighbors and friends. Some mentioned Graham had lately become paranoid about a murder plot against him. But police found nothing solid to prompt a homicide investigation. After checking every lead, the sheriff's office closed the case. Then, 7 months later, in January 1988, a hunter in nearby Clarendon County spotted a mound of dirt in a field. Checking it out, he made a grim discovery: human remains. He called police. Investigators determined the body had been placed in a grave only 10 inches deep and likely unearthed by scavenging animals. There was no evidence nearby to indicate who the victim was or how he died. The pathologist used dental records to identify the victim as Darnell Rhodes, reported missing a month earlier. Rhodes had been shot once in the back, twice in the face, and 5 times behind the left ear. A brutal murder, especially in this quiet community. At the time, no one had any reason to connect it to the farmer's fiery death 7 months earlier. The county sheriff's department wanted to bring in more resources since the violence was so extreme. So they called the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED. Lieutenant Gary Martin, one of the investigative experts at SLED headquarters in Columbia, knew to be ready for anything.
Always expect the unexpected. Things aren't always the way they appear, and there can always be additional circumstances involving a case.
SLED agents and sheriff's detectives began by visiting area hangouts the victim, Darnell Rhodes, was known to frequent. Many knew the man and said that around the time of his disappearance, Rhodes was usually seen with a friend named Charles McCrae. The rumors were that Rhodes and McCrae were professional henchmen committing crimes for wealthy businessmen in the area. Investigators wanted to know who these men were, but no one would offer any names.
Numerous people in the Atlanta community stated that they had seen Charles McCrae with Rhodes the day before he was reported missing.
Investigators learned that after Rhodes went missing, McCrae hinted that he had killed him. To get the truth behind the rumors, investigators needed to talk to Charles McCrae. At about the same time, someone filed burglary and assault charges against McCrae that were unrelated to the Rhodes case. Clarendon County detectives decided to arrest him on those charges, hoping they could get him to talk about Rhodes.
The right to talk to a lawyer and have him present with you while being questioned.
At SLED headquarters, investigators explained the witness statements they had regarding McCrae discussing the murder of Rhodes.
You want to relate that to us right now?
The suspect said he might be willing to cooperate if he could protect 2 family members who helped him after Rhodes was dead, according to SLED agent James Gamble.
He said his nephew had helped him dispose of the body and that he used his sister's automobile and that he didn't want his family being involved or accused of any part of this murder because they were not guilty. We'll do whatever we can to keep them from being involved.
When they agreed not to prosecute the others, McCrae admitted to shooting Rhodes to keep him quiet. He explained Rhodes had been talking to people about the murder of tobacco farmer William Graham.
Initially, the response from law enforcement was, no, there's no indication that that was a homicide. But then he gave them information which indicated that it was a homicide and which reopened the entire investigation.
McCrae claimed he had been hired to kill Graham and burn his house down. He said he broke into Graham's home late on the night of June 9th, 1987. McCrae found Graham asleep in the bedroom. He used a small caliber handgun, point blank behind the ear. McCrae stole the pistol Graham kept for protection. To cover the crime, he stuffed newspapers under the bed and lit them. As he left, he turned the lights on to make the growing fire less noticeable from a distance. McCrae sold both the gun he stole and the murder weapon to a friend. The agents asked who put him up to the killing. At first, he was afraid to say.
Did these two guys tell you why they wanted you to kill William Graham?
But eventually, he cracked. McCrae said it was two men, Bill Prince and Larry Marshall, business partners of Graham. Prince and Marshall hired him through an intermediary.
Hey, what's up? Okay, I got this old guy, William Graham. It's gotta look like an accident. Okay, fire, I'm thinking. Yeah, I can do that. All right.
They offered him $20,000 for the hit. The agents knew of Bill Prince and Larry Marshall, prominent local businessmen, both millionaires. They also knew that if they went up against the pair before a local jury, they would need more than McCrae's word to prove a murder conspiracy. And they worried Prince and Marshall might get to McCrae and make him change his story. On April 18th, 1988, 10 months after William Graham's death, agents secured a warrant to exhume the tobacco farmer's body. Law enforcement needed to look for evidence that somehow escaped them the first time, that Graham had been shot to death. X-rays taken during the second autopsy revealed two .32 caliber slugs in Graham's skull and a small entrance wound behind his left ear. A pathologist removed the projectiles so they could be compared to the murder weapon. Sled agents recovered the gun McCrae sold to his friend. Ballistics examiners noted similarities between the grooves etched into the slugs and those in the pistol's barrel. They determined that gun could have fired the bullets that killed Graham. More evidence implicating Charles McCrae. But investigators also needed evidence on the men who allegedly hired him. Graham's former business partners, Larry Marshall and Bill Prince. Prince's involvement with the victim went well beyond business. Graham had been his father figure.
Bill Prince had been raised by William Graham from the time he was a teenager. They became business partners, and as a result of being business partners, they took out a $500,000 insurance policy out on each other.
Prosecutor Salibi worked with the sled agents developing the insurance motive.
We found out that Mr. Prince had contacted the insurance company many times immediately after Mr. Graham's death, wanting to know how quickly he could collect the proceeds. In fact, he even volunteered to fly up to where the company was located and collect a check.
Investigators learned that Bill Prince made $500,000 off William Graham's death. Prince had also tried to control Graham's burial proceedings.
We talked with the funeral home that handled Mr. Graham's burial and found out that Mr. Prince had offered to pay for the burial if the body was going to be cremated, which of course would probably have destroyed the evidence of the projectiles that were still in his corpse.
Authorities made no effort to hide their investigation of Bill Prince and Larry Marshall, and discovered that the men had lost $400,000 to Graham in a recent lawsuit. And 2 weeks before he died, Graham had filed a second suit against them. A compelling financial motive, yet it was only circumstantial evidence against two millionaires not easily intimidated by the law.
No one was charged other than Mr. McCrae initially, because the only indication we had that others were involved were from Mr. McCrae. There were no corroborating witnesses, there was no physical evidence.
Then investigators' early fears were realized. The one witness they did have backed down.
Mr. McCrae soon recanted his story and refused to cooperate, so there was nothing to support what he was saying about others being involved.
Perhaps someone had gotten to McCrae and convinced him not to cooperate. In any case, investigators needed a new break in order to pursue Prince and Marshall. In December 1988, that break would emerge in a South Carolina cemetery. In 1988, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division agents investigated an arson and alleged murder for hire in the death of William Graham. When Charles McCrae confessed to the killing, he said that millionaire businessmen Bill Prince and Larry Marshall hired him for the hit. But then McCrae recanted and the investigation stalled. 8 months later, a lawyer asked SLED agents to meet him in a local cemetery.
What FBI? Yes.
He said he represented a man named Fred Peachy Andrews, who had information on the case.
Is that he knows who killed Mr. Graham.
What situation?
He's very nervous. The first thing he wants is protection.
SLED agent James Gamble.
The lawyer explained to us that Mr. Andrews was fearful of his life because he knew a good bit about the murder of Mr. William Graham.
The attorney said Andrews wanted to talk to authorities discreetly, so they set up a meeting. In a parking lot the next day, Fred Andrews spoke with SLED agents James Gamble and Gary Martin. He said he used to run an illegal gambling operation out of his office, and through that operation, Bill Prince and Larry Marshall came to him about a contract killing.
They had approached Peaches to either kill or find someone to kill William Graham because they thought Peaches had all these underworld contacts because he was running these poker houses and he'd going back and forth to Las Vegas, things of that nature.
And they got some other guy.
He said Prince offered $20,000 for the hit, but later told him that Charles McCrae had been hired instead. When McCrae started talking to the cops, Larry Marshall and Bill Prince began calling Andrews, threatening him to keep quiet. Prosecutor Dudley Salibi.
He was threatened not to reveal what he knew. That had the opposite result of sending him to law enforcement.
Andrews agreed to help get more evidence against Prince and Marshall and set up a tape recorder on his home phone. If the men called again, he would be ready. It wasn't long before Bill Prince did call.
You know who this is?
Once again, Prince brought up the Graham investigation. He said he heard Andrews was talking to Sled, and he and Larry Marshall needed to be sure he wasn't ratting on them. But this time, it was caught on tape.
That kind of talk can get a person killed.
Bill Prince stated to Fred Andrews that if it's true what I hear that you're saying to law enforcement, a lot of people could get hurt.
You're gonna pay the price.
To me, that implied that for his own safety, he should not cooperate with law enforcement.
It appeared Prince was willing to kill his father figure for money, and any witness against him to keep them quiet. Sled agents and prosecutors put together their case against Prince and Marshall. They had the original statement of the alleged hitman Charles McCrae, physical proof that Graham had been shot to death, the statement of Fred Andrews that Prince and Marshall ordered the murder, and the tapes of calls threatening Andrews not to cooperate with police in the investigation.
We gathered all the information that we could. We went to the Florence County Grand Jury, presented the case, and they were indicted for the death of William Graham.
Investigators secured arrest warrants for the two businessmen. On April 6, 1989, deputies and agents arrested Bill Prince outside a real estate office. He was charged with solicitation of murder, conspiracy, and accessory before the fact of murder. When Larry Marshall heard of Prince's arrest, he tried to run.
Sir, can you step out of the car, please?
What's this all about, officer?
But another arrest team found him driving out of town. They arrested him on the same charges in connection with Graham's murder. On May 6, 1991, at the Florence County Courthouse, the trial of Bill Prince, Charles McCrae, and Larry Marshall began.
What conversation did you have with Mr. Prince?
The state's key witness was Fred Andrews.
And, he said someone needed to be killed. And he said that man was William Graham.
He testified about Prince and Marshall approaching him about killing Graham, and then threatening him after McCrae was arrested.
20,000. Yes, sir. Thank you. No more questions for this witness, Your Honor.
You may step down.
The jury heard about the two businessmen warning
Counsel,
Andrews
calling
not
next
to
witness.
talk to police about the murder.
No further witnesses at this time, Your Honor. So noted.
On May 14, 1991, the local jury convicted Bill Prince and Larry Marshall of accessory before the fact and solicitation of murder. They also found Prince guilty of murder conspiracy, but it wouldn't last. The jury convicted Charles McCrae of burglary and conspiracy. But then, surprisingly, they acquitted him on the murder and arson charges.
You may approach.
Attorneys for the millionaires jumped at the apparent legal contradiction. They argued that since McCrae was acquitted of Graham's murder, their clients should be granted new trials. The judge agreed, overturning the jury's verdict, and released Prince and Marshall on $100,000 bond. The Florence County Solicitor's Office appealed to the state Supreme Court, asking that the guilty verdict stand. After 2 frustrating years of delays, the South Carolina Supreme Court delivered its opinion in December 1993. The court granted Larry Marshall a new, separate trial, citing insufficient evidence against him alone, showing intent to have Graham killed. Prosecutors decided not to pursue a new trial. There was more evidence showing Bill Prince actively sought a hitman to kill Graham. To the Supreme Court, Prince did order the murder. Legally, it did not matter who carried it out.
Ultimately, South Carolina Supreme Court upheld Mr. Prince's convictions for conspiracy, for solicitation, and accessory before the fact of murder, which carries a life sentence.
Prince's bond was revoked on August 29, 1994.
Miss Prince.
A team of investigators went to his home to take him into custody. He was to be held to await sentencing.
Okay.
But his wife said he had been gone for days. Agents searched the house but found no sign of him or where he went. Prince's truck was also missing, and investigators learned he had liquidated $190,000 worth of property. He had a head start and plenty of money with which to run and plan his next hit. After being found guilty of murder for hire, South Carolina millionaire Bill Prince jumped bond before sentencing. Days later, a South Carolina state trooper responded to a call about an abandoned vehicle. When he ran the plates, he learned it belonged to the fugitive, Bill Prince. It was sitting by the woods near Lake Santee, South Carolina, on the way to Georgia. Two major interstates, 95 and 26, intersect in the area. An easy escape in any direction.
Same license plate.
Believing Prince had fled the state, authorities contacted the FBI field office in Columbia, South Carolina. Special Agent Joe Youngener was assigned the case.
The sheriff's office said that they had contacted his friends and his relatives, and they did not know where he was. Once we obtained federally an unlawful flight to avoid confinement warrant, then we started looking for Mr. Prince throughout the United States.
They needed to narrow the scope of the search.
I learned at that time that Bill Prince had a brother, Don Prince, who lived in Wilmington, North Carolina, and was an insurance businessman. And he had taken over some of the business affairs for Bill Prince.
They believed he might also be helping to hide his brother.
We decided not to interview Don Prince because we did not think we would get his cooperation.
Instead, Wilmington agents developed cooperating informants in his neighborhood.
Morning, sir. This is Agent Henderson. Major Williams with the FBI.
When they knew Don was at work, they interviewed neighbors and explained they were conducting a federal investigation that required discretion.
Yeah, that's my neighbors.
Several recalled seeing Bill Prince with Don and agreed to help.
Well, let me leave the business card with you and ask that you give me a call.
And they knew Don Prince's comings and goings, where he went to work, where he lived, and proceeded to watch this and report to the FBI in Wilmington.
Within days, the plan worked. One neighbor spotted the Prince brothers outside Don's house. As promised, he contacted the FBI.
The Wilmington FBI office notified me that this lookout had actually seen Bill Prince there at the house, at the residence.
You asked me to... Yes. Yeah, they're down in Dijon.
By the time the FBI got the information, he was gone.
The many waterways of Wilmington would provide escape routes few would notice. Agents maintained surveillance on Don Prince, hoping he would lead them to his brother. But catching up with the millionaire fugitive wasn't easy.
Bill Prince was harder to catch than the usual fugitive because he had virtually unlimited resources. Bill Prince and Don Prince were both successful businessmen. They had money, they had cars, they had boats, and they had airplanes. They had offshore contacts, and they moved around. And once Bill Prince was able to solicit his brother's help in hiding him, this caused it to be a more difficult fugitive case. The FBI received information that Bill Prince may be in Puerto Rico, may be in the Bahamas, he may be in Wilmington, North Carolina, he may be in Florida.
Agents responded to every reliable sighting in these areas accessible by boat and small plane. But each time, Bill Prince was gone when they arrived. Soon the FBI learned Bill's brother Don was doing more than hiding him.
We also received information that Don Prince had contacted witnesses who had testified against Bill Prince, trying to get these witnesses to recant their testimony so that Bill Prince could get a new trial.
I'm an associate of Mr. Prince.
An intermediary for the Princes tried to get witness Fred Peachy Andrews to sign an affidavit swearing to new testimony.
Testimony at Mr. Prince's trial might be in your best.
But Andrews had no interest in changing his story.
I don't want to sign anything that has anything to do with any of you guys. You got that?
It really might be in your best interest. You need to take a look at this.
Yeah, I hear you.
His testimony would stand. But Don Prince convinced 20 other witnesses against his brother to sign the affidavits. Andrews was the holdout. By December 1994, Bill Prince had been gone from Atlanta, South Carolina for 4 months. Several times, his people had reached out to Peachy Andrews to get him to recant. Finally, on one chilly December night, someone tried to eliminate him.
Peachy informed the Florence County Sheriff's Office that someone had shot at him at his residence. This was a consequence, we suppose, of him testifying against Bill Prince. However, no one was ever captured, no arrest was ever made.
After the attack on Andrews, Larry Marshall came to the FBI asking for protection, fearing Prince would have him killed. Agents needed to find the fugitive before anyone else in the community got hurt. The FBI developed an informant close to Prince who was afraid to be seen talking to cops. So they slipped him the phone number to a dedicated answering machine at the field office, asking him to leave any tips he had on the machine. In August 1995, the informant called in.
Hey, I got a number for him. It's a pager. 423-555-2769.
The pager's billing address was a motel room in Knoxville, Tennessee. The Knoxville FBI office sent a surveillance team to the motel. They set up outside the room and waited. After several hours, they spotted a man resembling Prince.
He had changed his appearance from the way that we knew Bill Prince. He was wearing a straw hat, he had a suntan, and he had on a casual shirt. And the agents realized that this was the fugitive, Bill Prince. He first said that he was not Bill Prince, but then once they started talking with him, he acknowledged the fact who he was, and they arrested him.
After a year on the run, Bill Prince was finally going to prison. But even prison would not stop his orders for violence. After 52-year-old millionaire fugitive Bill Prince was captured, he was sentenced to life for murder for hire at the Lee Correctional Institution in Bishopville, South Carolina. Bill Prince would not be eligible for parole until he was 72 years old. His brother Don often visited. At the time, the convict was allowed unmonitored visits. Authorities had no idea what the two discussed, what they were planning. They only knew that Bill Prince wanted out and that his attempts to get a new trial had failed. Prince wasn't willing to give up. 2 months into his sentence, he began talking with a fellow inmate about revenge and murder. The inmate said he could orchestrate murders for hire through his contacts on the outside. Prince wanted 5 men killed. Fred Andrews, the main witness against him. Larry Marshall, his former co-defendant. Agent James Gamble, who helped put him away. An elderly man on whom he held life insurance. And even his own son, whom he thought was conspiring with Marshall to take over his fortunes. But Prince made a critical mistake. That inmate was an informant for the FBI. He worked for Special Agent Rob Weisenhofer of the FBI's Columbia, South Carolina field office.
Having informants in the prison system is almost as important as having them out on the street. It's paramount to have as much information coming out of the prison system as we can get, so it's important to maintain good contact inside. And they talk to the other inmates in the institution. A lot of times we'll find out what happens from talking to an inmate source.
The source told Weisenhofer about Prince's request for 5 contract killings.
The story was something that was hard to believe because it was so incredible and something that you'd really see on television or read in the paper, but not really an everyday thing.
Weisenhofer spoke to Special Agent Joe Youngener in Florence to ask about Prince's history.
Joe right away said, that all fits with everything that's happened, and I would not doubt that this guy's trying it again.
The informant was scheduled for knee surgery, so the agent met him in the privacy of the infirmary. Weisenhofer was not surprised to hear Bill Prince had his brother's help in the murder-for-hire plots.
Bill Prince was willing to pay a hitman, and the payment would come through his brother, Don Prince.
The informant said the brothers wanted to start by killing Andrews.
We asked the prison informant to play along with Bill Prince because we needed to corroborate what he was telling us. We were concerned that Bill Prince was attempting to find a hitman. We didn't want him to do that before we could intercept him. And so we decided to play the role of the hitman.
The informant would orchestrate the hit on Andrews, then arrange a meeting between the fake hitman and Don Prince, where they could complete the payoff and plan the other murders.
Just on this.
Agents from SLED and the FBI prepared for the sting. Bill Prince was just as dangerous inside the prison walls as he had been outside, as long as Don Prince was out there willing to do anything to help his brother.
Bill Prince and his brother Don Prince.
Investigators needed to stop the two by securing clear evidence of a murder conspiracy. According to SLED agent Billy Chastain,
Bill and Don Prince were not only brothers, they were true partners in crime. We needed to build a case not only against Bill Prince, but against his brother, who was not incarcerated and had never been incarcerated for any serious crime before. And we felt like we had to tie the two in a conspiracy to make it work.
the informant met with Prince and told him he had found a man for the job.
He said that the hitman was a member of a motorcycle gang and that for $5,000 the hitman would kill Peachy Andrews, and Bill Prince took him up on the offer.
The informant said he only needed to know where Andrews lived.
Bill actually drew a map for the informant. We then had that map mailed to us by the informant. When we checked it, it was real.
The map led agents directly to Fred Andrews' house. More circumstantial evidence of the brothers' conspiracy.
Mr. Andrews, FBI.
The agents met with Andrews and told him about the hit ordered against him.
No, sir. We don't have time.
They offered Andrews protection
Then send me back.
and requested his help with the sting operation.
We needed something that would spur a conversation between the informant and Bill Prince, and we decided that the way to do that would be to tell Bill that the hit had taken place.
Andrews agreed to help provide proof he had been killed. Agents staged a photograph of Andrews as the apparent victim of an execution. They would get the photo to Bill Prince with the story that the hitman took it after the murder. Then Andrews would go into hiding, further supporting the story of his death. At the prison infirmary, agents gave the photo to their informant. They also wired him for his meeting with Prince. They wanted to get Prince on tape, making arrangements to pay the hitman through his brother. So far, they had very little incriminating Don Prince.
We had to prove to Bill that the murder had indeed taken place so he can pass that along to his brother, who was really the hidden man in this whole deal, because he was slick and he always worked under the table.
The informant met with Bill in the prison yard, handing off the staged murder photo. But there was a problem. Prince said he did not believe it was Peachy Andrews in the photo, claiming his beard looked different.
Yeah, what that? I can't see what it is. That's what that looks like.
One more complication in a frustrating case. South Carolina investigators faked the contract killing of government witness Fred Peachy Andrews, trying to catch brothers Bill and Don Prince in the first of 5 murder-for-hire plots.
Wasn't enough.
A prison informant showed Bill Prince the picture of the hit, but reported to agents that Prince did not believe it was Andrews in the photo. Special Agent Rob Weisenhofer had to convince Prince and get it on tape.
Bill Prince had asked several questions. One, what type of ring was Peachy Andrews wearing, and what did his the tags on his car say?
Let's do it again.
Agents gave the informant the details he needed and sent him back to meet with Prince. The informant told Prince he just spoke with the hitman by telephone. He gave him the information requested about the ring and the license plate.
Ring drives a blue Oldsmobile, license plate NEB 531.
Prince was still skeptical. He told the informant he needed more to be convinced.
Oh. Another day in paradise. Lots more proof.
Frustrated, Special Agent Joe Youngener decided to add one more ruse to the investigation and planted a rumor that might help.
Joe Youngener over in Florence mentioned to a newspaper reporter there that he should check the police impound lot in Florence County. When the reporter went by the impound lot, he noticed Peachy Andrews' car was there. Mr. Andrews is sort of a local character, and that car was well known around Florence. So when the reporter saw that car, he put 2 and 2 together and realized that that Peachy Andrews, who had been an important witness in the Bill Prince trial, was missing.
Conducting interviews, the reporter learned Fred Andrews had not been seen for over a week, and people were beginning to talk that something had happened to him. What he did not know was that Andrews was holed up in an FBI safe house. On December 14th, 1995, the reporter published a story about Andrews' disappearance. When Don Prince read the column, he brought it to his brother Bill.
Yep.
They were huddled together in the meeting room, and it was apparent they didn't want anyone else to hear what was going on.
It looked like Bill Prince was finally convinced that Andrews had been murdered.
Thank you. See you later.
Now he would set up the payoff through the prison informant in a conversation taped by the FBI.
Don Prince left the institution and traveled on I-20 to a rest area about 65, 70 miles from Lee Correctional Institute, where he was told to look for a biker-type individual at the picnic area.
That biker type was in fact a SLED agent.
We had placed the undercover agent out at a table by himself so he'd be away from any traffic. We weren't sure how Don Prince was going to react when he was arrested, and we'd heard he always carried a gun.
Other agents watched from nearby to videotape the meeting and make the arrest. The rendezvous time was 5 p.m. The prearranged code was for Don Prince to ask directions to Turbeville, a town across the state. At 5:20, the subject pulled up.
Don Prince walked down and asked him where was Turbeville.
Must be done.
Special Agent Weisenhofer posed as a motorist using the telephone. Agent Chastain and the others prepared to move on his signal.
Our code was when Special Agent Weisenhofer dropped the phone, then everybody would approach Mr. Prince.
The undercover agent said he was ready to do the next hit against Larry Marshall. But Prince said they wanted to wait until things cooled down.
We'll be in touch.
Special Agent Weisenhofer dropped the phone and confronted Prince. As I arrived, Don Prince put his hands up initially and put his left hand toward his pocket. And at that time, I brought him down to the ground, and then we effected the arrest.
Come on, buddy. Come back here. Come on, man.
After we arrested Don Prince and put him in handcuffs, we picked him up off the ground, and as I was bringing him up off the ground, he said the things you do for your brother, and was coming to the realization what had happened to him at that point.
Agents recovered Don's gun from his car. His brother Bill was expecting to hear the payoff had taken place, but instead would soon learn Don had been arrested, and their days of ordering contract killings were over.
The Prince brothers are the most vicious individuals that I've ever been around. Bill and Don Prince are cold-hearted murderers in our eyes, and obviously in the court's eyes too.
Bill Prince, already serving a life sentence, was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to an additional 22 years in federal prison. His brother Don was sentenced to 17.5 years for his role in the murder-for-hire plot.
It was a huge team effort between SLED and the FBI, and we were actually able to save some lives. But it's really gratifying when you realize at the end of the day that people probably would have been killed if we weren't there.
Bill Prince was moved to administrative segregation. No more unmonitored visits. No more murder plots.
Get down on your knees. Get on.
In South Carolina, a family is taken hostage as part of a brazen bank robbery. Police track down the suspects, but they can't seem to keep the leader in jail. The FBI and police in 4 states are determined to stop him, but the armed fugitive is relentless in his struggle to stay free.
When a bank teller arrived at her parents' home, the gunmen were already there. The robbers held her family hostage and forced her to empty a bank vault. If she didn't comply, she could lose everyone she loved. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Even when authorities caught the crime's mastermind, they couldn't hold him. Soon he was back in action, with the FBI once again on his trail.
The Savannah River marks the state line separating Augusta, Georgia, from North Augusta, South Carolina. On the South Carolina side, on a Friday afternoon in October 1995, Parker and Brenda Shaw returned home with their granddaughter, Brianna. They watched Brianna on Friday afternoons when her mother, Amy Shaw, worked late as a bank teller. Parker tried to open the garage, but the remote door opener wasn't working.
I'll open the door and you guys can come in, okay? All right.
Not knowing someone was there, he went in the house to open the garage from inside.
Shut the door. Shut the door. Get down there. All right.
The two intruders quickly bound Parker with duct tape,
Put your hands up front of you. That's good. That's good.
then forced him into the bedroom. Outside, Brenda got tired of waiting. With Brianna, she began to walk towards the front door. When the garage finally opened,
Come on, lady, let's go inside. This ain't no game, lady. Let's go. I ain't playing with you. Let's go. Come on, move it. Move it. Let's go. Come on. Upstairs, lady. Let's go. Let's go.
the man forced Brenda into the bedroom where her husband was being held by the other two intruders.
Look, lady. Cooperate. Nobody gets hurt, okay?
The gunman stole money and credit cards from the frightened couple. But then the one who was clearly the leader announced he had really come for the Shaw's daughter, Amy, and the money at her bank. They would wait for her. The armed intruders held the Shaws for more than an hour.
Oh, lady, back. Sit down. Sit down.
At 7 p.m., the lead gunman ordered Brenda into the living room,
All right.
leaving one of his men to guard her husband and granddaughter. At the front window, they watched for Amy. They knew exactly when she was to arrive. For Amy Shaw, it was an ordinary Friday evening. The gunman ordered Brenda to the front door. Usually it was unlocked, so Amy was surprised she couldn't get in. She knew right away something was wrong.
Get over there. Get over there.
The leader grabbed Amy. He told her he had been watching them for some time. He knew their schedules, when they were vulnerable, everything. He began interrogating Amy about the security system at the bank.
And you have them? Do you have the code?
From her training, she knew it was best to comply with the demands.
Is it on the timer? Is the ball on the timer?
No, there's no time.
She said she could get him into the bank, but it took 2 codes to open the vault, and she only had 1.
You ready? All right, don't try anything funny. All right, turn around.
He said they'd deal with that when they got there, and warned her if anything went wrong, her family could get hurt.
Okay. All right. Okay,
The leader
shut up.
announced he was taking Amy to the bank
You're not gonna go for a little ride.
and told his men to wait for his call.
You guys got everything under control. Any false moves, take care of it. Let's go. Come on. Come on.
parents and little girl could only hope that she would not be harmed. As they left, the kidnapper removed his mask to avoid looking suspicious in public. At gunpoint, Amy drove across the Savannah River from South Carolina into Georgia and to the bank where she worked. The gunman ordered her to circle the bank slowly so he could check if a cleaning crew was inside. Pulling up next to the automated teller machine, Amy hoped to catch the kidnapper's image on its security camera. Deciding it was clear, he ordered her to drive to the back door. He told her that when they got inside, she was to explain all of her actions so he would know she wasn't setting off any alarms, and warned her again not to make any mistakes. Inside, she showed him the alarm she could disable. But as she had explained, she could not open the main vault door alone. She had one combination, but a co-worker had the other. The kidnapper reminded Amy that her family would remain safe only if he could get inside the vault.
Get to the phone.
At the Shaw residence, the intruders moved the family to the living room where they could watch the front. The Shaws hoped it would end peacefully, but the men seemed to grow agitated, their guns at the ready. The handgun had gone off accidentally. The intruders worried the sound had alerted neighbors. And their concern mounted as another car pulled up to the house.
Somebody's coming. Get over by the door.
It was Amy's brother-in-law and sister, and their young daughter arriving for a visit. They were taken as soon as they entered the house.
Let's go, lady. Come on. Come on. No, tie him up over there.
The gunman now had 6 hostages. At the bank, the lead assailant ordered Amy to call her co-worker for the second combination.
Hello? This is Amy.
When Amy asked, the co-worker hesitated, not understanding what was happening. Amy tried to explain that her family was being held hostage.
Get me the combination.
The gunman took over, threatening to come get the code himself.
Okay, just calm down.
Fearing for Amy's safety, the co-worker gave her the second combination. The gunman made sure the woman stayed on the line so she couldn't call police. Amy nervously punched in the second part of the combination. But the vault remained locked.
You gave me the wrong combination. Make it work or else.
She carefully tried again. And the door opened.
Get the phone.
The robber had Amy make sure the co-worker stayed on the line.
Which one of the dot packs?
And he ordered her to point out which bins held bait money that was sequentially numbered or rigged with exploding die packs. He left that cache alone. After the robber loaded up the money, he ordered Amy to call her parents' home on a second line.
Come on, get up and get the phone.
Hello?
The leader ordered his men to take care of things at the house, then leave and page him when they were clear.
And get out.
He took off with more than $86,000. Once he was gone, Amy set off the alarm to bring help. Then, frantic with worry, she called home. Her mother warned her not to call police. The armed men were still there. But it was too late. She already had.
Mom, don't hang up. Mom,
The gunman checked the terrified family's bindings. It seemed like they were going to leave. But one hesitated.
Look, I'm out of here, man. Let's go.
There were 6 witnesses to the crime.
Yo, come on, man. Let's go.
At 8 p.m., Richmond County Sheriff's officers responded to the bank in Georgia and learned the real crime was across the river. The lead investigator was Kenneth Booz.
We relayed all the information that we had to the Edgefield County Sheriff's Office and told them that there was a possibility that the family was still being held hostage.
Edgefield County, South Carolina Sheriff's investigator Don Bullock got the call.
We had a family hostage situation. Respond was code 1. That's everything you got, fast as you can get there.
The family had called, saying the gunman had left, but the deputies had to be sure.
Sheriff's office, open up. Sir, step back.
The deputies checked the house for the intruders. They were gone.
They were safe. Nobody was hurt. Physically, they weren't hurt, but mentally, they had to be shattered. They really went through an ordeal.
The Shaws described the men as best they could. They never saw faces and knew only they were African-American males.
Look, we still got Amy, all right?
The men were armed and aggressive.
Come on, man. Let's go. What you doing?
One had held a gun to Parker's head.
Look, I'm out of here, man. Let's go.
But the shot never came. When the assailants left, the family freed themselves and waited for police to arrive. Parker explained that the gunman took the keys to his son-in-law's car and described what they were wearing. Deputies put out an APB. As with any bank robbery, the Richmond County authorities notified the FBI. Special Agent Jerry Jones of the Augusta, Georgia resident agency arrived to interview Amy. She described the leader of the group and the direction in which he fled. She said she might have captured an image of him and told Special Agent Jones about the camera on the ATM.
She tried to get him into a position where the camera may take a photograph of him. As it turns out, the camera was activated only when one puts one's card into the machine, so that didn't work.
The cameras inside didn't catch him either. At the North Augusta crime scene, investigator Bullock arrived and was briefed on the search for evidence. Technicians from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division had found oily shoe prints on the garage floor and photographed them for future comparison if suspects were located. From inside the house, technicians recovered a single cartridge from the bullet fired in the living room. It was from a .38 caliber handgun, but had no prints on it. Attempts to recover the assailants' fingerprints elsewhere failed as well, since they had worn gloves throughout the crime. At the top of the driveway, investigators located a vehicle stuck in a ditch.
The two suspects, when they left the house, they were going to take a car, and they got the key from the victims in the house. In their haste to back out of the driveway, they backed into a ditch and could not get the car out of the ditch, so they left on foot.
The technicians recovered foreign fingerprints from the vehicle. More evidence to compare to any later suspects. Nearby, they located several items they believed had been dropped by the fleeing gunman. There were several weapons, including a shotgun and a .357 Magnum. Clothes, masks, and gloves found in the bushes matched what the assailants reportedly had worn. Without the clothes, police didn't have much of a description of the suspects. They updated the already vague APB. 3 African-American males, 2 probably on foot, 1 in a dark blue sedan, armed and considered dangerous. In 1995, South Carolina and Georgia authorities sought 3 masked men who held the Shaw family hostage and robbed a bank. Within an hour of the 911 call, an off-duty deputy was en route to the Shaw house when he heard the revised APB. He spotted 2 men, roughly fitting the description, walking away from the neighborhood where the Shaws lived.
Hey guys, let me talk to you for just a second. Where you guys coming from?
The deputy questioned the pair, according to Sheriff's investigator Don Bullock.
They asked them what they were doing there, and they said, we were up at the church playing basketball, and they had no basketball and no transportation.
Backup soon arrived. The deputies knew the church mentioned had no lights on its basketball court.
And being that time of night, it was dark. The red flags just flew up. It was, he put 2 and 2 together.
If you don't mind, can we just take them back around the corner in your car since I don't have a cage? Come on, guys, we'll just clear you up real quick and that'll be nothing to it.
The young men agreed to go to a police staging area near the Shaw house for further questioning. They were identified as Daniel Evans and Lamarco Roscoe. At the bank, FBI Special Agent Jerry Jones received word of the 2 men in custody.
I elected to leave the bank because the victim teller was comfortable and secure. So I left the bank and went over to South Carolina to interview the 2 suspects.
Jones made it to the police staging area about the same time as the suspects. He and Sheriff's investigator Kenneth Booz knew that with more than one suspect involved, it was best to talk to them separately.
We separated them because most of the time they'll start breaking down, but they'll start wondering what the other suspect has told us. When they start realizing that the other one might be talking, then they want to be the first one to get on the bandwagon and start cooperating.
The men had been unable to give details about the church where they had allegedly been playing basketball. And investigators sensed they were involved in the crime. Special Agent Jones began with Lamarco Roscoe.
You develop a concept of what their greatest fear is, some weakness they may have in their past or their family or something of that sort. And in this particular case, it was fear of the death penalty that got Roscoe's attention.
Jones knew Amy Shaw was safe, but gambled that Roscoe did not. He told him his primary concern was Amy's safety.
I told him that he needed to know that if the third robber killed her, that he would face the electric chair for his complicity in the robbery. Well, everything I told him was the truth. My primary interest was the safety and welfare of the victim teller. And it is true that had the third robber killed Amy Shaw, they would both have faced the death penalty.
The suspect soon admitted his involvement in the crime. When asked for the name of the leader of the group, he said he only knew him by his first name, Chris, and believed his last name started with a J.
Another law enforcement officer who was familiar with a number of ne'er-do-wells in the Augusta area recognized the name and actually asked if that was in fact Christopher Jaburk, which he replied that it was.
Jones then interviewed the second suspect, Daniel Evans.
I told him that his accomplice had already confessed, and he immediately began to tell me the story of what happened that night. I wanted him to confirm the name of the third suspect without prompting, and he immediately gave up Christopher Jaburk by name.
In talking to Roscoe and Evans, investigators realized the two were obviously the followers, and Jaburk was in charge.
They weren't the masterminds of this bank robbery. They were, in my opinion, they were mastermind stooges. They didn't appear to have much knowledge of what was going on, except for they had been with Jaburk several times in the past few days, looking at different banks, coming up with different plans on how to pull this one off.
When he was finished with the preliminary interviews, Jones learned a pager number had been recovered from one of the suspects. He asked an officer to call the number. When the return call came back, the officer identified himself. The caller said his name was Chris Jaburk. When asked, he said he was 100 miles away in Mount Vernon, Georgia. Jaburk was defensive and asked the officer if he was being accused of something. Then he hung up. Investigators headed for Jaburk's house right away.
As it turns out, law enforcement was very familiar with Christopher Jaburk and knew where the residence was without any prompting.
If he was the lead kidnapper, he now knew police were looking for him. And with a head start and $86,000 in cash, Christopher Jaburk could be anywhere. In October 1995, authorities were seeking Christopher Jaburk, wanted for armed kidnapping and bank robbery. At the request of FBI agents and Richmond County deputies, Jaburk's mother called her son on his cell phone and advised him to come talk to authorities. Around 1 a.m., he arrived with his girlfriend. Although only 19 years old, Jaburk was already on a 5-year probation for burglary and escape from a detention center. The investigators took him in for questioning.
Yeah, we would just like to verify that standard procedure.
His girlfriend agreed to come in too. At the Sheriff's Department, FBI Special Agent Jerry Jones questioned Jaburk about the kidnapping of the Shaw family and the bank robbery in Georgia.
I got a phone call from my girlfriend.
Jaburk admitted knowing the two confessed gunmen, Daniel Evans and Lamarco Roscoe, but denied any involvement in the crime.
And then
He said he was in Mount Vernon, Georgia with his girlfriend and another female friend at the time in question.
Jaburk at first gave the two girls as his alibi, claiming to have gone with one of the girls to pick up the other girl and then come back to Augusta, Georgia, and stated that he was with the two girls the entire day, and even after they arrived back in Augusta, Georgia, they went to a movie together, all three of them.
Temporarily halting the interview, Jones went to talk to the girlfriend and the second friend who had come to the station at the request of investigators.
The two girls, when interviewed, declined to corroborate that alibi. The two girls don't back up the story.
Jaburk quickly tried to come up with a new alibi, according to Richmond County Sheriff's investigator Kenneth Booz.
He said that he couldn't tell us his whereabouts at the time of the robbery because he was involved in some other criminal activity. It was a drug deal in Atlanta, Georgia, according to him.
Two guys named Roscoe and Abe?
Jaburk's new story didn't convince anyone. Federal authorities charged him with 6 counts, including conspiracy, carjacking, kidnapping, and armed bank robbery.
After further interviews with Jaburk, he finally started cooperating and told us that he was involved in this robbery and kidnapping, and that he was actually the one that did it, but he wasn't the mastermind, that he was involved with some large-scale criminal organization, and that he couldn't reveal any more information because he was afraid for his family.
It was another obvious lie by a man desperately trying to protect himself. Jaburk's partners, Daniel Evans and Lamarco Roscoe, pleaded guilty to state charges of burglary, kidnapping, and armed robbery. They were sentenced to 30 years in prison. Christopher Jaburk was prosecuted by Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Goolsby.
The only problem with this case was that there was no scientific evidence. It seemed like we hit a dead end every time we got a lab report as to any fingerprints or footprints. None of them matched Jaburk. But in terms of the quality of the evidence, we were very fortunate that the teller victim and her family members were just incredibly good witnesses. They helped win the case.
Jaburk was convicted on all 6 counts, which made him eligible for a sentence of life in prison without parole. While awaiting sentencing, Jaburk was held at a small county jail. There, he met another inmate. Jerome Frierson Bay, also a bank robber, was awaiting trial on 3 armed robberies. At the time, the jail was undergoing construction to expand the facility.
That's that one guard out that door.
There was plenty of time to plan an escape.
I think I seen that right around noon or whatnot.
On March 27, 1996, a guard on routine patrol noticed an open door. A head count revealed 2 inmates were missing: Christopher Jaburk and Jerome Frierson Bay. Construction workers had seen 2 prisoners running toward a wooded area near the prison. Search teams combed the woods, but no one spotted the men. The search moved into the area's denser forest and swamps. And helicopters flew grid patterns overhead. Still, nothing. Authorities believe the pair might have had help on the outside. Police tried to seal the perimeter, putting up roadblocks to stop and check vehicles. But the two escapees were nowhere to be found. Jaburk's escape posed a danger to the Shaw family, who had testified at his trial.
We needed to contact the victim's family members and let them know about it, and to take other precautions that you would in a situation like this.
While the search continued, Edgefield County, South Carolina deputies began spot checks on the Shaw family to make sure they were safe.
I was convinced that at some point in time he would come back to the mother. We established a surveillance, 24-hour surveillance of the mother and the girlfriend.
Authorities watched, but Jaburk never showed. Then, FBI Special Agent Doug Fender developed a surprising lead.
Myself and other local law enforcement officials were conducting a separate auto theft investigation in the Augusta, Georgia area concerning the theft of a green Mitsubishi Eclipse. We were able to identify an individual in jail who indicated that he had transferred this stolen vehicle to one of the female associates of Jaburk.
Agents interviewed the young woman at the hotel where she worked. Initially, she denied any knowledge of the jailbreak, but Special Agent Fender tried to get her to cooperate.
This job is mainly about talking to people. When you put all the fancy forensic techniques and those sorts of things aside, probably the success of most agents is based upon their ability to solicit information from individuals and make them tell them something that they probably don't want to share with you.
When she realized she herself could go to jail, she admitted helping in the escape. She said that she and Jaburk's girlfriend delivered a stolen car to a parking lot near a wooded area by the prison.
After he escaped from the jail, he just got into the getaway car and made his escape with Frierson Bay. They, by prearrangement, went to a clandestine campsite which the girls had laid out for Jaburk and Frierson Bay with clothes and water and that type of thing.
The escapees easily found the stashed clothes, food, and weapons. They were free, but they needed money. The armed bank robbers knew exactly what to do. In 1996, escaped prisoners Christopher Jaburk and Jerome Frierson Bay fled a county jail in a stolen car. FBI Special Agent Jerry Jones was after them.
We began a search for the stolen vehicle, and we sent out an APB to all surrounding states regarding the description of the vehicle.
The day after the escape, a car matching that description pulled up to a bank in Lumberton, North Carolina, 220 miles northeast of the jail.
That's right, just take the money.
Two men in hats, gloves, and sunglasses robbed the bank at gunpoint. The employees knew to cooperate, so no one would get hurt.
Come on, man, let's go.
Lumberton police and North Carolina FBI agents responded to the scene. They determined $4,500 had been taken from the bank's vault. Security cameras were rolling during the robbery. The images were too blurry to make out faces, but the descriptions given by employees resembled Jaburk and Frierson Bay. And the car they left in matched the one the fugitives had.
I'll be there. Thanks.
The car was the best lead for Special Agent Doug Fender.
This vehicle we had entered into NCIC, and we discovered or was notified by the Lumberton police officials that that car had in fact been recovered in Lumberton, North Carolina.
An hour after that car was found, agents received a report of a home invasion and carjacking in Lumberton and went to interview the victims. The couple said they had been working on their car in the garage when two armed men burst in, demanding the keys to the car and a change of clothes. Then left as quickly as they had arrived. When shown a photo lineup, the couple positively identified Jaburk and Frierson Bay.
And that's the guy that came up on the left side.
So we had a second vehicle, and we had an APB put out on that car. It was spotted in Raleigh, North Carolina. Jaburk and Frierson Bay robbed a bank there.
The fugitives were heading north, fast.
We knew that Frierson Bay had relatives in the New York, New Jersey area, so we suspected that to be the ultimate destination.
Tracking the pair became a matter of following a trail of bank robberies.
What we noticed was a trend of bank robberies that were occurring up and down the I-95 corridor. At the time we were tracking Frierson Bay and Jaburk, we suspected them in approximately 11 to 14 bank robberies up and down the East Coast.
In some of the robberies, men matching the description of one or both of the fugitives were captured on surveillance video.
We were able, through photographic surveillance and also witness identification, to establish that the two of them were together at least until they reached the Fredericksburg, Virginia area.
Agents focused their search in New Jersey, where Frierson Bay had family.
Based upon two tips that were called into a nationally televised program, Frierson Bay was tracked to a motel located in the Paterson, New Jersey area. A surveillance by members of the New Jersey FBI office was established. Once these agents were able to establish that Frierson Bay might be staying in the motel room, they remained on the premises.
If he were inside and armed, approaching the door would be dangerous. It was decided to wait him out. Soon they would learn the fugitive would not go down without a struggle. After two escaped prisoners committed a string of armed bank robberies, agents believed they had tracked one of them, Jerome Frierson Bay, to a New Jersey motel. After several hours, they spotted the fugitive. He went to his car as the SWAT team moved in.
Police, get out of the car! Get out of the car! We see your hands! Get out of the car!
He locked himself inside. But that wasn't going to stop them, according to FBI Special Agent Doug Fender.
After several commands by members of the FBI SWAT team, Frierson Bay still refused to come out of the vehicle, at which time one of the SWAT team members was able to break the glass with the butt of his MP5 submachine gun. Frierson Bay was then forcibly removed from the vehicle.
From his car, the SWAT team recovered a loaded .40 caliber Glock semi-automatic handgun, along with $1,500 in stolen cash. A search of the motel revealed no sign of his partner, Christopher Jaburk. Jerome Frierson Bay pleaded guilty to 10 bank robberies and was sentenced to 19 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He claimed he had no idea where Jaburk was. Finding Christopher Jaburk remained a priority for Georgia FBI Special Agent Jerry Jones.
We believe that Jaburk and Frierson Bay parted company, and Jaburk began his journey back to Georgia. I always believed that Jaburk would come back home.
The FBI announced a $10,000 reward and had begun the process of adding him to their 10 most wanted fugitives list when a media report generated a promising lead.
Just a moment.
A caller said she believed the fugitive was staying with her minister in Atlanta, though the minister didn't know Jaburk was a criminal. The caller spotted Jaburk when she went to check on the minister's house after the elderly man entered the hospital with heart trouble. An arrest team staked out the residence, dressed as yard workers. On May 9th, 1996, a vehicle pulled into the minister's driveway. When the driver emerged, agents visually identified him.
What's going on?
It was Jaburk.
Finishing up the yard work for the old man?
The arrest team moved in.
Hands up, FBI! Hands up! Hands up! Hey, whoa, what's going on?
Surprised and cornered, Jaburk did not try to run. When they searched him, agents found $2,000 in his sock.
Hey! What's this? What is it? What you hey for? What is this?
He was returned to jail, again to await sentencing for the Augusta kidnapping bank robbery.
When Jaburk was apprehended in Atlanta, we thought the pressure was off and everybody took a big sigh of relief and went home for a short period of time.
Jaburk was not giving up. Six weeks after his recapture, he once again broke out of his cell.
When Jaburk escaped and I received the telephone call, I responded to the jail to try to secure whatever evidence was there. We found a partial saw blade. When he got through the window of the jail, there's a huge double fence around the confinement area covered with concertina wire. So he had to get over that fence and over the concertina wire.
Agents searched the grounds and the fence topped with the razor-sharp wire. They recovered shreds of a prison uniform.
And we actually found traces of blood there, so we knew he was injured, but he was on foot.
They hoped he hadn't gotten far.
So we began to trail him through this rural wooded area, which also leads to a swampy area, probably around 10 square miles. We immediately brought in tracking dogs, which led us directly to the wooded area. So we knew the route of escape that he was trying to accomplish. As old as I was, out with the younger people going through the woods, and we tracked through there for days, for several days, without finding him. I then decided that we needed some electronic gear to try to trace him. So I contacted the Atomic Energy Commission site over in South Carolina, and they provided me with a helicopter equipped with an infrared system that's a heat-seeking system.
They searched dozens of square miles with the highly sensitive equipment. But somehow, Jaburk managed to avoid detection and was still on the run. 4 days later, an off-duty sheriff's deputy in nearby Appling, Georgia, thought he spotted the fugitive. The man was limping as if injured. The deputy called the station, and other officers spread out to search the area.
He was tracked into a wooded area right behind one of the grammar schools and apprehended.
Christopher Jaburk was again in custody. 2 weeks later, he was finally sentenced for robbing the Augusta Bank and kidnapping Amy Shaw and her family. Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Goolsby fought to keep Jaburk off the streets forever.
Our role is to try to protect the community. That's one of our important responsibilities. So we were concerned and felt like that we should ask for the maximum in Jaburk's case. And fortunately, the court imposed the maximum, life in prison, plus 5 years.
Jaburk was ordered to serve his term at the federal prison in Leavenworth, Kansas. Without the possibility of parole, his only chance to be free again would be to escape. Several weeks into his sentence, Jaburk was caught trying to do exactly that by hanging on underneath a prison laundry truck.
Come on out now. Come on. Nice and slow.
I see you. Come on.
Nice and slow. Come on. Get out of there.
He had almost made it to the front gate. Jaburk was transferred to the maximum security federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia.
Even if Harry Houdini was in the Atlanta federal pen, he wouldn't be able to get out, and Christopher Jaburk is no Harry Houdini.
No one doubts Jaburk will try again. But now, he is held in one of the most secure prisons in America. A sleepy southern town becomes a place of unimaginable horror as young girls begin disappearing. A cunning serial killer is on the loose, tormenting a family while evading capture. Until investigators could find a way to stop him, he would continue his hunt for more victims.
He was a predator, abducting girls and young women from their own front yards in broad daylight. He was a sadist, phoning one victim's family, taunting them, boosting, then dashing their hope. And he wouldn't stop until we stopped him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. This serial killer, whoever he was, could pass unnoticed in society. Yet he craved the attention his crimes provided. Somewhere in this contradiction lay the key to his exposure.
May 31st, 1985. The afternoon sun over South Carolina roasted the town of Lexington to a blistering 100 degrees. Sherry Faye Smith had found relief from the heat at a pool party with her boyfriend and fellow high school seniors. She was looking forward to the carefree days between her final exams and graduation. All of summer and the rest of her life, awaited the ambitious 17-year-old. She lived with her family in a quiet, rural community, a safe place tucked away on the edge of town. The Smiths' home sat on a generous lot of dense woods. The house was about 200 yards from the road. Sherry's dad, Robert Smith, served as a local pastor. This Friday afternoon, he worked at home in his second-floor office. He looked up from his studies to see his daughter pulling into the driveway and stopping to get the mail. In the next few moments, life in Lexington, South Carolina, changed forever. Expecting Sherry to walk in the house, Mr. Smith looked out the window again. He noticed her car remained near the mailbox, but she was nowhere in sight. Immediately, he felt something was odd. He decided to take a look. Sherry suffered from diabetes. With her blood sugar out of balance, she might become disoriented or incapacitated. When he arrived at the bottom of the driveway, Mr. Smith found Sherry's car still running, and the door swung open.
Sherry?
But his daughter was gone. There was no response to his call.
Sherry?
His mind began to race as he imagined the possibilities. Could she be lying in the woods somewhere, unconscious or in shock?
Sherry?
He yelled louder as he grew more frantic with worry.
Sherry?
There was no sign of her anywhere. Sherry was gone. Mr. Smith immediately called for help. The assistant sheriff of Lexington County responded to the call. The distraught father explained that Sherry was not the type to just run off.
I'm not sure what happened, but how much time it had.
She was responsible, warm, and well-adjusted. Not the sort of teenager to run away. But the sheriff took nothing for granted. He questioned Smith about his relationship with his daughter. Today, more than a decade later, Assistant Sheriff Lewis McCarty vividly recalls his impressions of the Smith family during his first conversation with Sherry's father.
We discussed his daughter's grades, what kind of child she was. It was determined that there was no animosity between mother and father and daughter. The Smith family was a very, very close-knit family, a very religious family. You just had the sixth sense that they were extremely close, that this child would not have run away on her own.
The investigator couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had happened to Sherry Smith. And the same intuition told him it had nothing to do with her medical condition. Every minute that passed increased the likelihood that Sherry might never be found. Knowing this, the sheriff called for assistance, bypassing the 24-hour waiting period required before officially classifying an individual as a missing person. While waiting for the other officers to arrive, the sheriff and Robert Smith retraced Sherry's steps, careful not to destroy any possible evidence. But the naked eye search yielded nothing. They had to wait for more equipment and expertise. Within minutes, officers from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, arrived at the Smith home. Investigators combed the scene, looking for tire tracks, foot impressions, or fingerprints. They found nothing. Knowing the next few hours were critical, the authorities assembled a task force and organized a massive ground search. The possibility of an abduction prompted a swift response. Crimes like this simply did not happen. Surrounding counties sent every available officer to help. Word of Sherry's disappearance spread quickly through the close-knit community of Lexington. Hundreds of local residents offered to participate in the search. Still, they found no trace of the young woman. Though there was no direct evidence that a federal crime had been committed, state investigators called on the expertise of the FBI. They wanted the Bureau to unofficially advise in the search and to assist in the investigation. Special Agent John Vollmer from the FBI's Columbia office was dispatched to the Smiths' house the next morning. The disappearance had even baffled the experts.
She was nowhere to be found. And she was not from a type of family background where that would readily indicate she'd run off with somebody. She was from a very stable, good family background, and they immediately thought obviously something had happened to her. But we had no idea at that point what.
The search urgently continued, with hundreds of volunteers and officers working around the clock. It was a daunting task. The heat and terrain hindered the hunt.
When you're talking about looking in a county of 500 square miles, it's almost like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's extremely difficult because you don't know where to begin and where to go.
2 long, hot days of searching passed, and still there was no sign of Sherry. It grew more and more likely that this was an abduction. Horrified that a crime like this could happen in their town, the residents of Lexington were gripped by fear. Children were not seen without their parents. No one went anywhere alone. With every hour that passed, investigators hoped there was still enough time to find Sherry unharmed. On June 3rd, 3 days after Sherry Faye's disappearance, at about 2:30 in the morning, a call disturbed the Smiths' restless sleep. Robert answered the phone. A voice he did not recognize asked for his wife, Hilda.
Hello?
The caller claimed to be Sherry's abductor.
Yes.
The captor apologized for taking Sherry and insisted that she would eventually be returned. He made clear this was not a ransom call. He told Hilda that she would receive a letter in the mail later that day.
Just tell us what you want.
He promised he'd call back and hung up.
He hung up.
Though a phone tap had been set up earlier, the call was too short to get a trace. SLED officers who were at the Smith home called Agent Vollmer immediately.
It really was unclear whether she was alive or dead. The caller was indicating that she was alive, that he would see that she was returned safely. And I think at that point everyone was hopeful that he was truthful and that in fact she was not dead and would be returned to her home and family.
A letter, hopefully containing clues to Sherry's whereabouts, would be a welcome break. But first they had to find out if the letter, promised by the caller, really did exist. Not wasting any time, they woke the town's postmaster and ordered him to open the post office before daybreak. Then they went to work, sifting letter by letter through the piles of outgoing mail.
Long envelope, something similar to this.
After a half hour, the postmaster found an envelope addressed to the Smiths. Carefully, they slipped it into an evidence bag and sent it to the SLED forensic labs for analysis. Inside the envelope, examiners found a 2-page letter written on yellow legal paper. Their excitement melted into horror as they began reading the letter. It was entitled, Last Will and Testament. It began, I love you, Mommy, Daddy, Robert, Dawn, and Richard, and everyone else, and all other friends and relatives. My thoughts will always be with and in you. Casket closed. I am sorry if I ever disappointed you in any way. I only wanted to make you proud of me because I have always been proud of my family. The letter ended with, all my love, always, Sharon, Sherry Faye, Smith. With the help of the Smith family, investigators confirmed that the handwriting was Sherry's. Lab examiners began the painstaking task of analyzing the letter. Searching for prints, hairs, fibers, and other clues would take weeks. While investigators hoped the document might provide other valuable leads, they were alarmed by the letter's content.
We were shocked. We were concerned for her well-being. There were several phrases in the letter that she refers to. One would be casket closed. Is, you know, why would a child make a statement, casket closed?
Sherry's fate was unclear. The abductor had all the answers. He had promised to call again. Until he did, the Smith family clung desperately to hope. Just days after Sherry Faye's disappearance, her abductor had called to taunt the family. Since then, agents and detectives set up a voice recorder in addition to the tap already on the Smith phone. Having the abductor's voice on tape would be invaluable. If the suspect called again, they would be ready. The wait was excruciating. At 8 o'clock on the evening of June 3rd, the phone rang.
Go ahead and answer it. Try to stay on the phone as long as possible.
Hello?
It was the voice from the night before. He spoke to Hilda.
Did you receive the letter today?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you know now that this is not a hoax call.
Yes, I know that.
Okay, listen real carefully. I got to hurry. I know these calls are being traced.
Is Sherry with you?
Sherry is now part of me. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, our souls are one now.
Your souls are one now with Sherry?
Yes, and we're trying to work this out. So please do what we ask.
The trace had been successful.
Go ahead, US 1.
The suspect had called from a phone booth about 20 miles away from the Smith home. A network of sheriff's deputies staking out the area raced to the scene, hoping to catch the caller still on the phone. But when they arrived, all they found was a phone dangling off the hook.
Area, any cars? Give me plates, any cars leaving the immediate area right now.
He had slipped away, leaving nothing behind, not even fingerprints.
They just missed him.
Sherry's older sister, Dawn, recollects the agonizing uncertainty.
I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. I didn't understand that he was a very sick person. I'd never dealt with anybody like that in my life. But I really believed that he was taking care of her and that there had to be some reason for the madness of Sherry being taken.
On the surface, the abductor's phone conversations revealed nothing about Sherry's whereabouts. However, for the FBI, the phone calls offered the first glimpse inside the mind of this twisted predator. It would be up to FBI profilers in the Investigative Support Unit at Quantico, Virginia, to penetrate this criminal's mind. John Douglas pioneered behavioral profiling for the FBI. He and others developed the investigative tool from over 25 years of interviews with convicted killers, arsonists, rapists, and bombers.
Okay, good. When someone asks for a profile, what they're looking for are characteristics, which includes gender, includes age, race, sometimes body typing, educational level, occupational type.
To determine these characteristics, the profiler attempts to think like the killer. He tries to uncover his motivations. Examining every aspect of a crime reveals patterns of behavior. What emerges is a profile describing the type of person the killer will most likely be. After scrutinizing every detail of Sherry's abduction, Douglas generated a 22-point profile of the suspect. He painted the abductor as a white male, in his late 20s to early 30s, with above-average intelligence. He would most likely work as a blue-collar day laborer. Because it sounded as if the killer had electronically distorted his voice, he probably worked in electrical contracting. He would have a prior criminal record. Douglas also suggested he lived locally. The tone and content of his phone calls indicated he was an asocial obsessive-compulsive. If the stress of everyday life became too great, he would break down. He would then feel compelled to compensate for his own inadequacies through violent actions.
He's the type of guy that he feels like one grain of sand on a beach where there are billions and billions of grains of sand. He feels like nothing. He feels like a nobody. And how can this nobody, this personality, this person who's probably overweight, low self-esteem, unattractive, how can he become a somebody? He'll go after victims that there was no chance that he would ever come in contact with someone like a Sherry Faye Smith. And so for the first time in their life, they can be powerful.
On Wednesday, June 5th, the Smiths received another call. This time, he gave the family directions to where they would find Sherry.
Listen carefully. Take Highway 378 west to traffic circle. Turn left at white frame building. 6 feet beyond, we're waiting. God chose us.
Investigators raced to the location, hoping they might still find her alive. Six days after her mysterious disappearance, investigators found the body of Sherry Faye Smith.
When the Smith family received the call to the location of the body, we went immediately there, and our worst fears came true.
Sherry's body had been laid in the woods of Saluda County, some 17 miles from the home from which she vanished. Her abductor was now wanted for first-degree murder. A week of 100-degree heat had taken its toll. The body's advanced state of decay worked in the killer's favor. The medical examiner could not determine the exact cause and time of death. To John Douglas, the location and condition of the crime scene provided further insight into the suspect's mind.
He had some criminal sophistication, because I believe what he did is he waited for her to now go into advanced stages of decomposition, which would make it more difficult for law enforcement to determine cause and method of death in this state of decomposition.
The confirmation of Sherry's murder devastated the Lexington community. That Saturday, a crowd of 1,000 mourners attended a funeral service at the town's First Baptist Church. That evening, following Sherry's funeral, the killer could not resist inflicting more torment.
Well, may I speak to Mrs. Smith?
Sherry's Aunt Beverly answered the phone.
I want to speak to Dawn.
I'm sorry, she's not available either.
Beverly stalled him, hoping to gain valuable time for the phone trace.
Yeah, I have to go then if I can't talk to her.
But the suspect threatened to hang up if he couldn't immediately speak to Dawn.
Hello?
This thing got out of hand, and all I wanted to do was make love to Dawn. I've been watching her for a couple of weeks.
To who?
To Sherry. Dawn, I hope you and your family forgive me for this.
When you killed Sherry, was she at peace? She wasn't afraid or anything?
She was not. She was at peace. She knew that God was with her, and she was going to become an angel.
Overwhelmed with grief, Sherry's mother insisted on talking to her daughter's murderer.
Did you tell her you were going to kill her?
Yes, I did, and I gave her the choice, and she picked suffocation.
My God, how could you?
It did not escape the attention of the FBI and local investigators that the killer had mistakenly used Dawn's name when he spoke of Sherry. They braced themselves for the possibility that this killer might be turning his murderous obsession towards Dawn. But the suspect would make only one more call before falling ominously silent. Though he wasn't talking, they knew he was still out there, terrifying a community. And the profile predicted that if he killed once, he would kill again. In June 1985, FBI investigators continued to hunt the kidnapper and killer of 17-year-old Sherry Smith. While investigators focused on the Smith murder, the elusive predator pursued other plans. On Friday, June 14th, 2 weeks after Sherry's abduction, a man grabbed Deborah May Helmick from her front yard in Richland County as she played with her brother. She was just 9 years old. The child's screaming alerted a neighbor. But the woman was not fast enough. The abductor managed to slip away in broad daylight. Helmick's neighbor could only provide vague information. However, the general description of the suspect and his method appeared eerily similar to the man the FBI wanted for the murder of Sherry. Richland County sheriffs immediately contacted the task force in nearby Lexington.
Within moments of that abduction, we were aware of it and began to focus on that case also. We were pretty much in our minds, I think that everybody knew these two cases were connected.
For John Douglas, the case took on an even greater sense of urgency. Deborah May Helmick's fate seemed almost certain.
Once they get the urge, they're out looking for the preferential victim, but if they cannot find the victim of choice, they will go after whoever is available. And that was the case here with Deborah May Helmick.
News of the second abduction brought Douglas down from Quantico, Virginia to South Carolina. The FBI hoped they could find 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick before her young life was cut short. In the Smith case, the killer's phone calls had been a critical link for the investigators. It had been nearly a week since Deborah's disappearance, and they hadn't heard from him. To get him to call, Douglas devised a plan. With the help of the local media, he would set a trap.
And the way that
One key element of the plan placed Dawn Smith in jeopardy. Douglas had to ask the Smiths to put their other daughter at risk to catch Sherry's killer and hopefully find young Deborah. Dawn agreed.
A lot of times people thought we were twins. We looked a lot alike, and so they came up with this plan that if I were to answer the phone, maybe he would turn that fascination from Sherry to me. And if I could keep him on the phone talking long enough, about Sherry, about himself, about anything to keep him on the phone, then they could trace the call and catch him.
Allow him. Douglas's strategy centered around a memorial service for Sherry. Investigators promoted the service in the local press. The agents hoped the attention to his first victim would rekindle the killer's fascination with Dawn. Douglas needed something else to bait the trap, a personal item from Sherry's room. Based on experience, Douglas knew that sexual predators are often attracted to personal items of their victims.
She likes koalas.
They want mementos that they can keep, even display as trophies. He noticed the koala bear. It was the mascot of the university she planned to attend in the fall.
This is going to work perfectly.
The day of the memorial service, plainclothed agents swarmed the grounds, hoping their suspect would visit the cemetery. As the family's minister delivered a eulogy, Dawn and her parents huddled close. Though Dawn had willingly volunteered to lure the killer to the trap, the danger it presented weighed on everyone's mind. There was no telling what the suspect might do.
The security around Dawn was heightened. We were extremely concerned about Dawn becoming a victim.
Then, as planned, Dawn placed some flowers and the koala bear on her sister's grave. Now all that was left to do was wait. Using Douglas's profile, FBI agents coached Dawn on how to handle the suspect when he called.
I was told to never be threatening, to never be harsh, to be real understanding and sympathetic and compassionate, and I was with him. And I think he liked that because he felt like he was very much in charge, which is something that he thrived on.
Several calls came to the Smith home following the memorial service. Not knowing if it was Sherry's killer, Dawn had to answer every one. Shortly after midnight, the phone at the Smith house rang again.
Hello? I called Dawn Smith from Sherry. Will you take the call?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
As Douglas had hoped, the culprit took the bait. And as anticipated, the killer had turned his focus to Dawn.
You can't be protected all the time.
He made it clear to her that she was going to be his next victim.
You know, God wants you to join Cherry Bay. It's just a matter of time. This month.
Despite the threat, Dawn kept him on the line, enduring abuse from the man who murdered her sister, while officials traced the origin of the call.
Richland County?
Yeah, okay, listen carefully. Go one north.
Then, before hanging up, the killer offered directions.
Turn right. Deborah May is waiting. God forgive us all.
Special Agent John Vollmer feared that the killer would not stop there.
Once he called about Deborah Helmick, then you're leading into the possibility that you now are dealing with a possible serial killer who has killed now at least 2, you suspect, maybe others before, and may continue to kill others.
Despite Douglas's success at getting the suspect to call, no one had anticipated just how far away the killer would go to avoid detection. Tracing the call from outside the area took additional time. Again, the suspect left the phone booth moments before the authorities could reach him.
We were very, very close to catching him on a number of occasions, and it's almost as if he sensed this and began to move further in making his phone call.
Other investigators followed the caller's directions. There, they found 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick murdered. The gamble had failed. With every missed opportunity, the probability of more victims increased. And now, Dawn was the most likely target. Investigators feared the killer would make an attempt to abduct her. An elusive serial killer had already killed 2 girls around Lexington, South Carolina. The slim amount of evidence frustrated FBI investigators as well as local law enforcement. But the forensic analysis was about to generate the biggest break in the investigation. The last will and testament of Sherry Smith was examined by Gail Heath, director of the questioned document section of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Labs. Using an ESDA machine, Heath hoped to find hard evidence. The ESDA, an acronym for Electrostatic Detection Apparatus, can pick up images that are invisible to the naked eye. It works on the opposite principle of a printing press. Instead of coating raised letters with ink to create an image, the ESDA fills in the indentations on the document in question with graphite. When an imaging film similar to Saran wrap is pulled tight over the document, a readable image comes through. After hours of examining the document, Heath found indented writing. It appeared to be a phone number and a name.
The particular name and phone number in question, we were able to bring up the entire area code, the first 3 numbers of the prefix, the next 2 numbers, the 3rd number we were unsure of, and then we had the 4th number.
The name on the pad was Joe. From the area code, investigators determined the number was from Alabama. To fill in the missing digit, investigators called every combination of the phone number until they reached a party who had the same name as the one found on the legal pad. They finally made a match. The number belonged to a man named Joe Shepard. Investigators scrutinized his phone records. They found that he had received a call from an address just outside of Lexington in Lake Murray, South Carolina. Either of these addresses could belong to the killer. Armed with the FBI profile, local police visited the Alabama address.
How you doing? You Mr. Shepard?
They met Joe Shepard. He didn't match the killer's profile. Even though he was not a suspect, he could still be an important link to the killer. Police had to find out the connection between him and the Lake Murray, South Carolina phone call. Shepard explained it came from his parents' home. South Carolina officers verified that the address belonged to Joe Shepard's parents, Ellis and Sharon Shepard. Investigators went to the Lake Murray address to question the residents. The house was just 2 miles from where police found the body of 9-year-old Deborah Mae Helmick.
10-4.
They learned that Ellis worked as an electrician in home construction. It was a profession the FBI profile predicted. As the officers knocked on the door, a car pulled into the driveway. When investigators saw the Shepards, they immediately felt they had hit another dead end. Besides Ellis Shepard's profession, nothing else seemed to fit the profile. They questioned them anyway. The Shepards told them that they had recently returned from a 6-week trip. The officers casually asked if the couple knew about the Smith and Helmick murders. With every question, the police noticed Mrs. Shepard becoming more concerned. The Shepards were beginning to suspect their house sitter, Larry Jean Bell. As they described Bell, elements of the profile fell into place. He was a white male, in his 30s, who lived with his parents. He sometimes assisted Ellis in home construction. just days earlier, when the Shepherds returned from the vacation, Bell had picked them up from the airport. He talked to the Shepherds at length about the cases. He was closely following the news of the murders. It was more evidence of a meticulous mind and behavior consistent with the profile.
They said that he had saved the newspaper articles, told them all about the case in great detail from the airport back to their residence. Again, it was uncanny how much this profile was on track.
The detectives asked if they could see the inside of the house. Suspecting the killer had used a weapon to force Sherry Smith into the car, they asked Ellis Shepard if he owned a gun. Shepard led them to a drawer where he kept his revolver.
Last time I used this gun.
To his surprise, the gun was gone.
Got a good idea.
The officers asked the couple to accompany them to the precinct. They wanted the Shepherds to listen to recordings of the killer's calls to the Smith family. The investigators needed to know if the voice on the recordings belonged to their house sitter.
For a couple of months, and then they'd find out I'm sane, and then I'd get tried and get sent to electric chair, put in prison the rest of my life. I'm not going to stay in prison the rest of my life.
Though the caller may have electronically altered his voice, to the Shepherds, it was clear that the man on the tape was their house sitter, Larry Gene Bell.
I filled in all the holes and everything.
We were all extremely elated. We could not show any emotion, but we knew that we had the case at that point. We had our man.
But anyway.
The Shepherds told the police that they expected Bell to return to their home at 7:30 the next morning for work.
We're going to have a Detective Perry outside.
Investigators staked out Bell's residence. This time, there was no way he could elude capture. Larry Gene Bell headed down the highway to the Shepherds. He failed to notice the unmarked police car following behind him. The officers radioed to another car waiting to cut him off at the approaching intersection. June 26, 1985, at 7:19 a.m., investigators finally trapped the elusive Larry Gene Bell. This time, it was the investigators who were one step ahead. Bell was arrested without resistance and taken to the precinct for questioning. With Bell now in custody, investigators still needed to build an airtight case to make sure he would never be free to kill again. Combining hard forensic evidence with the FBI profile, South Carolina police arrested Larry Gene Bell on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. But now they had to prove beyond any doubt that he was indeed the killer of Sherry Smith and Deborah May Hellman. It was up to Lexington County Solicitor Donald Myers to make the case. A career prosecutor, Myers was determined to convict the killer who had so horrifically taunted his victim's family.
I did not like Larry Gene Bell even before I knew him. And I knew that this was probably the most publicized case that we would ever had, the most publicized in South Carolina up to that time. And I pretty much committed myself to go after him with everything I had.
Though there was powerful evidence against Bell, it was only circumstantial. Still, in the state of South Carolina, a confession could guarantee the maximum sentence. Myers needed to make sure that Bell would never be able to take another life.
Stacked up against him.
He wanted a confession.
He's facing a mountain of evidence.
Again, they called on the FBI to help. they recommended setting up an interrogation room that would elicit a self-incriminating statement.
For instance, a map showing where the phone calls were made, some pictures of the victim so that he's aware as he looks about the room to remind him of the victim. You might have fingerprint cards on the table. You might have notebooks or file cabinets that would have his name on them, all to make him think you obviously have narrowed in on him, you've got the goods on him, he might as well go ahead and give it up.
While the officers prepared to question Bell, other detectives secured a search warrant for the Shepherd's house. For the next 12 hours, the forensic team combed every square inch of the home, looking for anything that would firmly connect Bell to the crimes. As the profile predicted, the house was in perfect order. It was meticulously cleaned, vacuumed, and dusted, particularly in the room where Larry Jean Bell had been staying. But beneath the orderly exterior, the team uncovered evidence of his deviance. The bed's pristine sheets concealed a thin, dirty mattress, and beneath that lay a porn magazine and a handgun that matched the description of Mr. Shepherd's missing .38. Despite the freshly vacuumed carpets, an investigator retrieved a blonde hair in the space where a vacuum cleaner wouldn't reach. A lab would match the strand to Sherry Smith.
Mel, how are you this afternoon?
While the investigators continued the search for evidence at the Shepherd's home, detectives at the interrogation carried out the FBI's strategy. First, they made sure Bell was comfortable. As advised by Douglas, they spoke to the suspect in a non-threatening way. They pretended to empathize with him, to understand his pain, in order to pry him open. They walked their suspect through the growing mound of evidence condemning him. At every chance, they reminded him of the victims. Bell denied everything. However, he did make a curious request. He wanted to meet Dawn and Hilda Smith. Hoping the mother and sister of his first victim might stir a confession, the Smiths agreed. Hilda and Dawn tried to mentally prepare themselves. Finally, they stepped into the room and came face to face with Sherry's killer.
He began to mumble and he began to speak about how he was sorry that the person sitting in that chair couldn't have been the one that had done this. But another Larry Bell could have been the one. He really didn't make a lot of sense. And so I remember sitting there, I remember looking at him, I remember listening to him, and I really just felt disgust. That I knew this was the man. And he wasn't even man enough to say, I did it, I'm sorry. Just trying to make excuses. But my mom said the most incredible thing to him. She said, I know you're the man that killed my daughter, and I can honestly say that I don't hate you. And he got teary.
But Bell's emotional break went only to the point of tears. He never made the confession authorities wanted. After weeks of compiling evidence, Myers and the investigators began to piece together the sequence of events of May 31st, 1985. Bell noticed Sherry Smith after dropping his mother off at a doctor's appointment. Something about the young woman triggered his lecherous cravings. As she left the parking lot, Bell followed. His desire shattered what little restraint he possessed. He never let her out of his sight. Sherry did not notice the car following her down the road. pulled into the driveway and stopped at the mailbox. Bell wasted no time.
Tell me the way to...
He had taken Sherry completely by surprise.
Come on, you're going with me!
He brought Sherry to the shepherd's house on Lake Murray. Bell then canceled dinner with friends. He told them he wanted to stay at the shepherd's and watch a baseball game. He had already tied Sherry to the bed. The evidence showed that Sherry had been raped. Before killing her, Bell coerced Sherry to write her last will and testament. "12 hours after she disappeared, he covered her mouth with duct tape and suffocated her. Investigators believed that she was dead by 4:58 a.m., the time Bell claimed that their souls became one. It took less than 1 hour for 12 South Carolinians to find Bell guilty of first-degree murder. Myers prosecuted Bell in a separate trial for the murder of 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick. He was found guilty a second time. With Bell's conviction, the Smith family could begin to rebuild their lives.
There was a sense of relief that, okay, now he can't do this to me, he can't do this to anybody else, and he will be put away.
Larry Gene Bell paid the ultimate price for his sadistic crimes. On October 4th, 1996, he was put to death in South Carolina's electric chair. Though the loss of Sherry Smith and Deborah May Helmick will always be felt, life in Lexington has slowly returned to normal. With skill and determination, the South Carolina law enforcement community and the FBI brought closure to a grieving town by ending the deadly game of cat and mouse.